Did you know that something as humble and simple as salt and water can take your simple vegetables and literally transform them into these probiotic-rich superfoods that not only are gonna last you for months and months, but they're also going to boost your gut health tremendously. So today I'm gonna be breaking down fermentation for beginners. We're gonna walk through some very simple brine recipes, talk about how they work, why they are so good for your gut health. So some things we're making a simple brine and we're adding them to, and then there are other vegetables like sauerkraut and radishes that the vegetable itself is making its own brine. And I wanna talk about this too because it is such an easy point of entry for so many of us to really just take our humble vegetables, elevate them, and boost our gut health in the meantime. So when I first started making ferments, I'm pretty sure I made a fermented radish. It was a very easy point of entry, really kind of hard to mess up, right? I was newly postpartum, very tired, and honestly just running on empty. If there are any postpartum mamas watching this, you're shaking your head, and I know you've been exactly where I've been, right? I had a holistic health practitioner tell me that I had adrenal fatigue. At the time, I am shameful to say, I had to do a quick little Google search because I didn't even know what that term meant. But what I did know is that I was extremely stressed out. I was so tired, and at that point, living on coffee and a prayer. But after working with a holistic health practitioner and a nutritionist, I realized that the adrenals and the gut are actually deeply connected. And every time I was eating, I was either fueling my body or hurting my body. And so for me, when I would give up breakfast and opt for a cup of coffee, I realized that was just putting more stress on my cortisol and really just putting me in that fight or flight, compromising my adrenals so much. And so I was growing a garden at the time, yes, but I hadn't really thought about food as a whole and really how to just add more nutrients to the vegetables I was already consuming. So when I really learned how to dive into the art and the logistics of fermenting food, I realized I wasn't just preserving vegetables. I was preserving my health in so many ways. I was amplifying so much, and just I noticed a drastic impact of how I felt almost immediately. And the great thing is when you start consuming ferments, not only are you getting all of the health benefits that the ferment has, right? I mean, it's great for your gut health. You're gonna have all these living live probiotics, which we already know is stellar, but it's gonna help you absorb the nutrients from other vegetables as well. And so you guys, I kind of figured this out, and I have just been on a quest ever since to eat as many fermented foods as I can, but also to kind of break down the process. It's not scary. Yes, it smells a little funky. Yes, there's gonna be things that sometimes bubble over. You might even have a little explosion or two, but that's the fun thing about learning. And now I find myself postpartum yet again, and fermented foods have quite literally saved my life. I've eaten fermented foods every single day, and the transformation that has happened in my gut, the transformation that has happened to my skin, the transformation of my mental clarity has been something I cannot even truly explain. And so the best way I know to explain is to just educate and show as many people how simple fermentation can be so that you can start implementing this right now in your kitchen, and you can experience all of these health benefits that I rave about all the time. So without further ado, grab your salt, grab your water, or maybe just grab your cozy cup of tea, because we are about to just break down all the basics you need to know to start fermenting like a pro, and honestly just take control of your health again, because it took me a while to do that, and if I could go back and do anything, I would have started fermenting foods way sooner. So let's get started. So let's first start with the foundation of almost every vegetable ferment, and that is the brine. If you can understand your brines, you can literally ferment almost anything. I teach and talk a lot about sourdough, and I tell people that your sourdough starter is kind of your engine, and if there's anything wrong with your bread, you can always revert back and fix the engine, and it's usually always connected The best way I can explain that with fermentation is if something is wrong with your ferment, you can most of the time always revert back to the brine. It is going to be the engine and the workhorse. And if you can redial this in and figure out what's wrong, then more than likely you can fix your ferment, which is really encouraging because it makes it very easy to just go back to the source. Instead of trying to figure out, well, is X, wrong, Y wrong, Z wrong, you're like, no, we know for a fact it's probably going to be the brine. So let's go back to the ingredients we put in the brine, which are pretty humble, right? We talked about that. So they're pretty quick fixes. So once you can dial in and know your brines, you guys are really just setting yourself up for so much success to make killer ferments week after week. Maybe it's month after month. We do a huge haul seasonally, right? So we're doing a ton of fermenting in the spring to kind of last us through to the winter. And then we'll do another huge, massive round. And when I say massive, you guys, we're fermenting all weekend long. And that way we're only having to make a few ferments in between just to kind of fill the gaps. So I first want to walk through the basic brine recipe. So this is where you are mixing up a brine and adding it to your vegetables versus the vegetable itself creating the brine, okay? And so you're just starting with 2 ingredients. You've got your water and then you have your salt. So the ratio that I have always used is about a 2% to 3% ratio based off of weight, okay? And so what that equates to is about 1 tablespoon of salt per 2 cups of water. And the more you want to do, you will just keep multiplying this to figure out how much you actually need of the basic brine to make. So this is important in terms of ingredients, quality of ingredients. We're going to talk about this too. But this is either where everything's going to thrive and it's going to just invite all the good bacteria in, or this is where there have been some sort of something wonky going on with these 2 ingredients and it's going to shut those out. And that's when mold's going to happen maybe, or some sort of contamination, right? And so the brine is where we're either going to invite everything in because we've chose quality ingredients, or it's going to shut everything out. So once we're able to just kind of nail down these 2 things, then we're really just kind of setting ourselves up, right? We're pretty golden moving forward. I will say though, this is a tricky one because I've added too much salt before. I've chose chlorinated water that has inhibited the fermentation process. I've used iodine pickling salt before. Like, there's a lot of things that I have done wrong. So while these seem like 2 basic ingredients, they are. We're gonna first chat through why the quality of these ingredients matter. So when it comes to salt, not all salt is created equal. And this is something I just did not know. I did not understand the importance of salt. I thought just your white table kosher salt was fine. And it wasn't until I started learning about fermentation that I realized, whoa, there is something here to salt, okay? And so you want a good quality, unrefined sea salt. Really what you're looking for when it comes to like a Celtic salt or a sea salt or something like this, you just want something that has trace minerals. You want it to be mineral rich. You don't want it to be completely depleted. You don't just want to use white table salt because it's lacking a lot of those trace minerals, which is then not going to, result in the best ferment. Not only are the trace minerals a key component, the biggest thing we're looking for here is we don't want them to have any additives. We want them to be in their most natural, raw form. Now, I have had the joy of heading up to Utah and touring the salt mines. And so I have got to harvest my own salt, see the whole process behind Redmond Salt. And so they are the company that I just love supporting. I love promoting because I've got to see the entire process. And let me tell you guys, it is about as natural and clean as it gets. So oftentimes, if you just go to your grocery store and you're just buying your white table salt, the reason you'll have a funky ferment is because most of the times they contain iodine and anti-caking agents. And those properties alone are going to inhibit the fermentation process to work correctly. That's why when in doubt, just find the purest form of salt that you can, and that is going to be your best bet. And then the other important thing to pay attention to when you're making your basic brine is water. It is really, really important, just like that regular table salt has certain things that inhibit the fermentation process. You want a non-chlorinated water, okay? So a spring water, some sort of filtered water. We just use our Berkey filtration system, but that's really, really important. The reason it's really important to get a non-chlorinated water is because that chlorine can also inhibit that beneficial bacterial growth that we are trying to bring into our ferment, right? It can kill it off. So that's why I say if at any point your ferment's a little sticky or a little wonky, you can probably just redial in these two things and you're gonna fix a lot of your issues. So why this works is because this saltwater brine is gonna do two things at the same time. So the first thing that this saltwater brine is going to do is it is going to kill off any of the harmful bacteria that would naturally cause your food to rot. And then the second thing it's gonna do is just create the perfect environment for lactobacillus. Now, I know that's a fancy word, okay? So do not get intimidated. All that is just the good bacteria that we are trying to invite, right? So we want to see that lactobacillus because that is where the powerhouse of ferment actually start and create, right? It's where they start to shine. Because all of those good bacteria, that's what takes just our humble vegetable ingredients and really elevate them into something that's very, very nutrient dense and fantastic for our gut health. So what happens is when we pour this basic brine over just our regular vegetables, it's gonna eat up all the natural sugars in that. And then it's also going to produce lactic acid. And that is what's going to give our ferments that tangy flavor, but it's also what helps extend the shelf life of our vegetables as well. And so honestly, that's just the basis of your basic brine. You know now why the salt's so important, why the water's so important, what it does and how it transforms your vegetables. And so if you can really just start with a good basic brine, you are going to just set yourself up for so much success when it comes to fermenting your vegetables at home. So now that we have kind of nailed our basic brine, which is great for so many ferments, there's actually some vegetables that you don't need to add a water brine to. So cabbage is a really great one, radish, cucumbers, right? Because these things contain a lot of water on their own, so they actually make their own brine, which is really, really cool. When I started making my first batch of ferment, I told you guys it was a radish, and I actually did a water brine for it, which you can do, but I didn't realize until later that the radish actually contained enough water on its own that I could have just massaged it long enough. I'm gonna actually walk through that process with you guys, and it would have created its own brine. So how it works, you're first just going to, if you're working with some sort of radish, you just want to take a mandolin and thinly cut them. With this cabbage here, I'm just gonna cut it up pretty thin and toss it into some sort of bowl. And so what happens is when you cut up your vegetable and you toss it into some sort of bowl and you throw that salt in there, it is going to naturally pull all of the water from that vegetable. It's something called osmosis. And that is that osmosis in action, which is actually just so cool. Like when you think about it, I don't know, it's just always really fascinating to me. Just how, you know, nature kind of works on its own, but also how things were done for years and years before us. So what will happen is literally within minutes of adding the salt to your vegetables, you will start noticing that that salt is going to pull all of the liquid and the water out of your ferments. Now you are gonna have to massage it a bit. You're gonna have to get your hands dirty, but that's a really cool thing about it. And you'll start to notice that it's pooling at the bottom. So I've just cut up some cabbage here to show you guys. Let's sprinkle some salt on here and see how this actually plays out. All right, so I'm just going to sprinkle some salt on here. And we are going to massage it. Now, the more you massage it, the more the vegetable is going to release the natural liquids in it, okay? So I just kind of do this tossing, turning method, but you really don't want to be delicate, you guys. You don't have to be delicate. So just keep going in, and you're also going to notice too, especially on certain ferments like radishes, when you cut a radish, it's pretty crisp, right? When you start to do this natural, you know, brine, then it's going to turn pretty flimsy. You're going to notice a big change in the structure of that vegetable. Well, that's also how it's going to be with cabbage. You've got this pretty, you know, tough cabbage. Once you start working that, it is going to go limp a little, but you're just going to keep doing this until you have enough brine at the bottom that will be enough to cover your ferment itself. So this technique right here is just the classic technique for sauerkraut. It's also what you're going to do with any sort of kimchi. This is the base of how you make it, which for me, something about just getting your hands dirty really connects you, right? And so I absolutely love doing these methods. It's just really, really fun for me to get my hands dirty. Like I mentioned though, you could also do this with a radish. You could shred a radish. You could do this with the turnip. You could do this with a rutabaga. There's a lot of root veggies that you could do this style of fermentation to, and it would work really, really well. So here's what's happening at the microbial level. Now we're not gonna nerd out because we are simplifying this, right? For the common folk like you and I. And this is how I truly had to learn this, because when you started throwing out terms like lactobacillus and all this stuff, I immediately got overwhelmed and I immediately thought, oh my gosh, I'm not smart enough to do this. But in layman's terms, here's what this means. All of this salty liquid that's in here, it's really just protecting against any harmful bacteria that could get in. And when it does that and it kind of protects your vegetables, that's when the lactobacillus can come in and actually start to get to work and can just turn these humble vegetables into the nutrient powerhouses that we know them to be. So it's kind of wild, right? Because you don't need vinegar, you don't need any additive. It is literally just the vegetable you're fermenting and salt. So more than likely, those are things you already have just hanging around in your pantry, as long as it's the right type of salt. We already covered that, but it's just super, super simple. All right, so you guys can see here. Now, I'm gonna continue cutting up this whole cabbage to make my ferment, but just for the sake of showing you guys, the more you push down on this, the more liquid that is actually going to appear. But not only that, I have all this extra liquid that was in my bowl, and so I'm just gonna pour it over, and then we're gonna put a follower. So that could be a weight, but with cabbage specifically, I love to just use the cabbage leaf to make sure that everything is submerged underneath the brine. That is very, very important. So I have my trusty sidekick here, but I think it is important to spend just the next few minutes kind of nerding out and talking about the true health benefits of fermented foods. I have seen fermented foods single-handedly change my life, and I mean that. I have seen mental clarity. I've completely healed my leaky gut. I have just seen so many positive effects of that. So I want to take a second and dive into kind of the nitty-gritty, the nerdy section of it, of why that actually is. And we first have to ask ourselves, well, what's really happening inside this jar, right? When we take our vegetables and we take our salt, or maybe we're making our brine, what actually takes place to where we're just having this simple, humble cabbage turning it into something that is so probiotic-rich that it is just like feeding, nurturing, and healing us quite literally from the inside out. So what happens is that lactobacillus bacteria is feeding on all the natural sugars in our vegetables. And as they eat, they produce a lactic acid. And that lactic acid is essential because that's what's actually going to preserve all of our vegetables and make them safe to eat. It's also what's keeping all the harmful bacteria bacteria away and giving your ferment that natural tangy flavor that many of us come to really just think of when we think about fermented foods. So here's where it gets really exciting from a gut health perspective, okay? Those same bacteria that we're talking about, those are all those probiotics that our bodies so desperately need. Are those living microbes that support our gut lining, leaky gut. Oh, we got dirty, huh, buddy? Yeah. So these are all essential if we want good gut health and gut support. Because once we can turn this into a probiotic, powerhouse, then we eat those, we get all of those just direct nutrients impact our digestive system positively, right? We allow more nutrient absorption for the other foods that we eat. We are just literally consuming living live probiotics. So what most people don't know, that just a couple spoonfuls of sauerkraut has more living probiotics than an entire capsule of store-bought probiotics, okay? I whipped this up pretty quickly. I mean, we did it together. So I spent years and years buying over-the-counter supplements thinking that it was the key to my gut health and supporting my digestive system. And the truth is, I could have eaten a spoonful of sauerkraut and it would have had more beneficial impact for my gut and my overall health than buying all of those expensive supplements over the counter. Which is why I just recommend so many people, if you're really wanting to do this for the health aspect, if you're really wanting to get your gut health in check, you've got to start with fermented foods, because the living probiotics available to you is out of this world. So not only is all of that really cool, right? Like, hopefully I've wooed you over, and when you get done watching this, you're gonna head out to your grocery store, your garden, or the farmer's market, and you're gonna go buy you some good quality salt, you're gonna get you some vegetables, and you're gonna start fermenting. But there's also something else that I think is just so stinking cool about fermentation. Not only does it take the, vegetable and make it ridiculously nutritious, right? But it makes certain vitamins like B, K, and C more bioavailable. What that means is that it allows your body to be able to use them and absorb them more easily, which is again just going to impact us in a positive way that much more. So what I hope you get from today's video is that fermentation is so much simpler than many people think. Whether you are whipping up a basic brine to go over your carrots or your garlic, or maybe you're making your own brine with a radish or a sauerkraut or kimchi, you can literally achieve wellness in a jar that you make right inside your kitchen. And I think that's really, really special. You're unlocking so much flavor, but you're also unlocking so many nutrients. And so I just wanted to break this down for a beginner's view into fermentation. What are simple brines? What are simple vegetables? And I really hope that it encourages you that you can start making your own wellness right in your own kitchen. And it's gonna be way cheaper than buying anything on a store shelf. So I would love to hear from you. Have you fermented vegetables before? If not, what's gonna be the first vegetable that you ferment? You can see here, I've got quite a few over here on my shelf, which I'm gonna add this to it, but I would love to hear from you, and thank you all so much for hanging out with me. I'll have some more recipes from all the things you saw here today down in the description if you wanna give them a go for yourself, along with some other videos I think you might find helpful. But thanks for hanging out, guys. I'll talk to you next week.